Joining me now in a Fox exclusive, the lead prosecutor in the Alex Murdaugh trial, Senior Assistant Deputy Attorney General Creighton Waters, and South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson. Gentlemen, very good to have you with us. We hung on every word of this trial, and congratulations on the huge win that you had about a week ago today. How does it feel?
Feels great, Martha. Thank you.
So it's really been a whirlwind, but very happy that we're on the other side of this thing.
I bet, because I know you guys have been putting in months and months of long hours, and you could tell by the way that this was put forward in the courtroom that you had drilled down on every detail over and over again. But obviously you were going up against a man in this courtroom whose great-grandfather's portrait used to hang at the back of the room. I thought it was stunning when the judge mentioned that. He said, we had to take that down, Mr. Murdaugh, because we didn't want to influence the jury. But obviously they have a long-standing, prominent family, which is something that you wanted to make very clear, because a lot of that house of cards was coming down for Alex Murdaugh. And I think that it was clear that you felt that that went to the motive here as well. But there were times, Mr. Waters, when people observed what you were doing in there and said, you know, he's letting Alex Murdaugh control this whole thing. Did you ever feel that you were losing control of it, that he was kind of taking over at times?
Not at all. Actually, I think that that was precisely the strategy that I had. This was not going to be a traditional cross-examination. I think if I try to do it that way, and that's typically it, where you try to control the conversation, that it would have been a disaster. One thing I knew about this man was, he was an effective trial lawyer. And I had no doubt, because of what we understood about him and his makeup, that he would be convinced in his ability to look those jurors in a community where his family has long dominated, look them in the eye and try to convince them of one last lie. My strategy actually was to get him talking. There were intentional pauses that he couldn't help himself, and he would start talking anew. And I really wanted to see that jury watch him be able to lie in real time. I wanted him to speak as much as he wanted to, because I think they would see him refine that lie, actually lie, new lies in front of them. And in the end, I think that was an effective way to do that. I also had to break up that cross over the course of 2 days. I know when I got started, the end of the day was about 2 hours away. So I did want to move into some of the territory early, because I knew I would just be starting over the next morning and trying to build that momentum.
Yeah. This video, the famous Snapchat video, which really changed everything when you hear from the jurors in this. So I am curious about the moment that you first saw this video and how you figured out that it might be his voice in the background, Creighton. And then, Alan, maybe you can weigh in with your reaction when you guys first figured this out off of Paul's cell phone, which was cracked open in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, so we initially had some information from a young man about that he thought that he had heard Alex on a phone call with Paul. And of course, Alex had denied that, and that's the kind of evidence where, he was mistaken. He must be wrong. When we were able to get into that kennel video and hear it, we all recognized Alex's voice immediately and knew that as we were putting our timeline together, that was right around the time these murders happened. And not only that he had lied about that. That became very significant, as you know. We continued to put witnesses on the stand to identify his voice there, because he had never admitted that. And the first time any of us ever heard him admit to finally being at the kennels was when he took the stand that Thursday. One of the things about this case that was different is, we had to go about it a different way, because Alex was the defendant. And I had to play his 911 call. I had to play his interaction with Daniel Green at the scene. I had to play those initial statements to get too much internalized with the jury without them thinking critically about what he was saying. But on the other hand, I wanted them to get very, very familiar with his voice, so that when they first heard that kennel video, they knew, as well as everybody else in the courtroom, that was Alex at the scene with the victims shortly before they were murdered.
Alan, what was that?
Martha,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember having to sign the murder indictments against Alex Murdaugh, and I remember there was a lot of evidence that really we looked at. We didn't look at one particular piece of evidence, but that piece of evidence was actually crucial to my decision to actually indicting him. I had to sign the indictments. And so I remember we met last summer with SLED and made that final determination. That was a critical piece of information for me. And back to what Creighton was talking about earlier, You know, I always thought of Alec as when he got on the witness stand, he was known for his theatrics and his ability to connect with juries. That's how he'd been such a successful plaintiff's attorney. So this was, in a way, his final closing argument to the jury. He believed, just like all the other jurors that he had appealed to in years past, probably in that same courtroom, he thought that he could do that again, just one last time. And from what I've heard from the jurors that have already been on the media talking about how they deliberated, they saw right through it. They felt manipulated and lied to all the way through, and including that testimony he gave. And I think Creighton, to his credit, did an amazing job letting him run with his own closing argument to the jury. It ultimately hung him.
You know, it's fascinating because I think attorneys in this kind of situation often advise their clients, just answer the question. Don't expand. Just answer the question. But it was almost as if he felt that he was too smart for just taking that tactic, that if he kept talking, he was going to be able to win this jury over, as you're saying. And here's the moment at the end of your cross, Creighton, on the second day that Alex Murdaugh was on the stand.
But you still told the same lie. And all those reasons that you just gave this jury about the most important part of your testimony was a lie too. Isn't that true, Mr. Murdaugh?
I disagree with that.
Nothing further.
How did you feel when you were looking into his eyes? Did you feel like you were wearing him down? Because he was stony-faced in many ways throughout this, except for the big emotional nose-running moments.
Well, yes, and again, I had to start over that next morning and did have to kind of wear him down. But I'd been waiting for that question. I'd listened to his testimony. That's sometimes the hardest part of being a lawyer and waiting for your cross, is actually listening to what the defendant has to say. And in this instance, he identified a couple of factors as to why he decided to lie during that interview on the early morning hours of June 8th. And as I continued to talk with him and give him opportunity to refine his story, he started adding in additional factors. And I'd been sitting on that one for the entirety of the cross, waiting to play that moment, where, the 911 call, but more importantly, Daniel Green, where he's already lying. He's already creating a timeline that's false, and long before those other factors even existed. So that's an instance right there where you really don't care what the defendant says in response to it. At that point in time, what the jury is hearing is that question. And of course, as you may recall, my first question to him is, isn't it the most important part of your testimony here to try to explain to this jury why you lied about being kennel video? And he even hemmed and hawed on that, but he conceded it was important. And that was the first question, and then 6, 7, however many hours later, that came back to that for the last question.
Alex Murdaugh is always the smartest guy in any room he walks into. I mean, he's been one step ahead of everyone in his life for the last decade plus. His family, his friends, his law partners, his clients, and even the police. He was always one lie ahead, and I think he just truly believes, getting on that stand, he was the smartest guy in the courtroom, and sadly for him, he wasn't.
What was your sense of this jury as you're watching their faces throughout? Because I heard other court reporters saying, well, there's a guy that looks like he pays no attention when the prosecution is up there. I think he's already been lost to this case. What did you feel when you were looking into those jurors' faces?
Well, I had the ability to do that, in particular during that cross. And, I felt like we were getting, not just with me, but when other attorneys were up there as well, that we were getting very good body language. I watched that body language with Alec change over the course of this cross-examination. He gave, of course, a very riveting direct, but that's the easy part. But I watched the jurors, I watched their body language change and shift during the course of that cross, from leaning forward to watching him to kind of sit back in their chair to starting to turn away from him. And those are usually good, some pretty good cues as to what's going on. And then I was able to look them in the eyes as I was explaining to them during the course of that cross how convincingly and easily this man has been able to look people in the eyes and lie to them for the longest time. Again, I can't underestimate the factor of a man who the people that were closest to him, whether his family, his best friends, his law partners, not a single person knew who he really was. And as I said in sentencing, that's chilling. And there was a time, I think, when I elected to ask it this way. I asked if he was a family annihilator, sort of the ultimate question. And his eyes have flashed very hot right there and very cold. And that was very telling to me.